the whiteboard again. And this time we're going to use it to talk about the 3 I's. And this is a great way, it's an efficient way, it's an easy way to remember, and it's just effective in learning how do you actually get injured, right? Is pain, is that an injury? Is moving the wrong way, are you injured then? So we're going to talk about what constitutes you actually being injured. So we have the 3 I's. We have incomplete mechanics, we have incidence, and on the end here we have injury. This is the circle here, the third I. So we'll start from the beginning. And in the beginning we have incomplete mechanics. And this essentially all this is how are you moving? How are you moving? I'll put a bunch of exclamation marks there because this is the most important one that drives an incidence and an injury, which we'll talk about in a second. But incomplete mechanics is what drives an injury and what drives pain and everything that's associated with that. So all an incomplete mechanic is, and right, how are you moving? How are you running? How are you deadlifting? How are you squatting? And it applies to literally anything, right? Like picking up a pencil off the ground, opening a door, right? How did your shoulder round forward when you tried to open it, right? There's so many things. This applies to everything. So a great example is, let's take a distance runner, because I see a lot of distance runners, and an incomplete mechanics in a distance runner may be, hey, you're landing too far out in front of your body, you have a crazy heel strike, maybe you have a heel whip. So when you see these things and hear these things of, oh, you're overstepping, you're overstriding, you have a heel whip, heel striking not necessarily, but can be. So once you know, if someone has told you this, or that you've had a gait assessment, and that's that's what they've seen, or a therapist as myself has seen, an incomplete mechanic will lead to an injury and to an incident. So, but you might not have any pain with this, right? And this is the case too. An incident is when we start to have pain. The incomplete mechanic is just that. It's, hey, something's going on. We're moving the wrong way, whether it's our mobility, our strength. So this can be broken down. Mobility, strength, skill. More the running form is the skill part we talked about a lot, but it can be mobility. Are you tight? Are you lacking some mobility? So if I'm trying to get into this shoulder flexion, like, oh, I'm stuck here, I'm not gonna be able to hold a barbell here. I will need to get a little bit higher up to be able to efficiently hold that. If I try and do that and hold weight over my head in this forward position, I'm gonna compensate, and then we're gonna get these other things that happen. So incomplete mechanics, how are we moving? It's mobility, it's our strength, and it's our skill. And we won't have any pain here. And this is what makes it a little bit insidious and makes it tough to say, hey, when do I need to go see somebody? Need to go see a physiotherapist as myself, or need to go see a clinician as. I would argue when a trainer can do this as well, just as physio as myself, of, hey, we need to fix these because this is the driver of all this other stuff. Another great example is, hey, I'm squatting, if my knees are squinting in, I know you guys can't see it, but if I'm squatting with bad mechanics, eventually we're probably going to cause some issues and some pain and maybe an injury. I might be able to do that once or twice or 10 times and not have any issues, but over time, if I move the wrong way, we're going to have some problems. So now we can move on to an incidence. And all an incidence is, this is when your incomplete mechanics, right, the way you're running, your deadlifting, your squatting, your mobility and strength are lumped into this. This is where if we do something enough for enough repetitions, we start to have some kind of an ache or a pain. And a great example is, let's say, again, runners with knee pain. So if I'm a distance runner and I'm having knee pain, and maybe I go for a run and I'm like, I just get a little bit of knee pain during the run, maybe afterwards, I go to bed, I wake up, I'm like, I'm good to go, back to the trails, back to the road, back to the grind, and it keeps happening, right? It's not limiting you from running, right? You can still run, you can still, do what you love doing, but you're like, it just tweaks my knee, or it just tweaks my back, but I'm totally fine. I can still move around and do everything I want to do. This is what an incidence is. This is where we start to have some kind of a pain, right? Incomplete mechanics, no pain. Incidence, now we start to have some pain. Now we're like, okay, now our body is telling us something that, hey, if we weren't aware of it, you're moving the wrong way, and our body is letting us know, right? It's not, body is this great thing that says, hey, whenever we have pain, something is going on. right? It's a signal from our body saying, hey, this is something going on and we need to address it. So incidence is a byproduct of incomplete mechanics, and this is where we start to have pain. A great example is a runner who has runner's knee because they are overstepping and overstriding. And now we're going to move into injury. So an injury is, now that our incidence has continued on. So let's say you're this runner and you said, I'm just gonna run and not care about this, and because I love running, and I'm just gonna blow past this knee pain. It'll just go away on its own. And unfortunately, most of the time that does not happen. I wish it did happen, but now let's say you're running, all of a sudden you step off a curb, tweak your knee, like, oh gosh, it popped on you, swelled up, and now you can't run, and let alone maybe even walk. So now we're in this injury phase of, right, can't participate as participate, I can spell today, or right knee, in our sport or activity. So this is, right, I guess other examples could be to tear your ACL. That doesn't follow this as much, even though it can, right? You could land in a bad position with incomplete mechanics, and you can actually bypass it and just go right to an injury. As many ACL tears are, there's not like I sprained my, typically you don't sprain your ACL, but for the most part it's this progression, especially with distance runners, of incomplete mechanics to the incidence and then to the injury. If you let it go long enough, right, that knee pain will get more and more intense, and then it's like, okay, now I can't run because there's all this inflammation. Maybe there's some cartilage issues that are going on, probably reversible anyway, but this is where people run into problems of a lot of people just wait till the injury. And that's not that we can't work on that. By all means we can. But if we can nip this in the bud earlier on in the incidence phase, or even in the incomplete mechanics phase, which is what I love to see. So if you're an athlete out there, a runner, CrossFitter who thinks, hey, I don't know how I'm moving, or I have to wear Olympic lifting shoes when I squat, or I have issues with my overhead squat, it just doesn't feel right. Typically our body is very good at like, it feels weird. Maybe it's not painful, but weird. Probably a byproduct of incomplete mechanics, and there's things that we can do to fix that. And if left unchanged, will eventually become pain, and if that's left unchanged, eventually become injury, or eventually become, incident to injury. So I hope this made sense. A big takeaway from this is incomplete mechanics drives everything else. So when we're treating this, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. How do we, right, if we have an injury, how do we treat it? If we have an incidence, how do we treat it? We go back to step one, incomplete mechanics. Anytime you have an incidence, an injury, you might have to calm some things down, right? You might have to do some other maybe modalities or some other techniques to help calm that down, or if the incidence is really flared up. But we go back to step one. We say, hey, how are you moving? How strong are you? How much stability do you have? And how mobile are you? Right? If I'm having shoulder pain with my overhead right, squats, and I'm squatting down, and I can't get my shoulder all the way here, if I'm only here, well, let's fix that. That's a mobility issue. It could be most likely a strength issue as well, but it's a mobility issue. So we need to take a step back, find out the root cause, and then we can take care of the injury incidence area. Another example, in a distance runner, with this knee pain, that if they're overstepping and overstriding, well, let's train this. Let's not overstep and overstride, right? Is it a pure skill? It could be, most likely, typically it's one or it's not just one of these. Like for instance, if you have a mobility issue, you're probably gonna have a strength issue, and also a skill issue. So they all overlap, but there's typically one that's causing it. So with a runner, it could be they have tight hips. That might be why, hey, I can't get my leg back. So I'm gonna step more out in front to try and make up for that. And that's very, very normal. So having somebody to be a clinician who's trained in being able to sit down and say, hey, let's find the root cause. This is where you're going to see the biggest bang for your buck. Not just slapping heat packs on, not just taking ibuprofen. Those are great. If you're here and you're trying to calm it down, by all means, that's fine, and it will kind of help you get through. But we have to go back, and to fix it for good, we have to look at the incomplete mechanics, not just these like ice packs, heat packs, NSAIDs, and temporary solutions.